Hello and welcome to Fearless DIY Music. My name is Tristan Lass, and today I am joined by my dear friend Kevin Gamble. He and I are going to have a discussion of AI and its impact upon the music business and musicians. But before we leap into that, I would like to just say hi to Kevin, thank him for being here, and see what he has to say.
Hey, Tris, thanks again for having me. A lot of good stuff to talk about, and a lot. When you get into the concept of AI, I think one of the first topics it connects to is the question of authenticity. That's been a long-running question in art and music, but I think it's becoming, really prevalent right now with AI. And so yeah, got a few different things to touch on in this conversation related to that. First thing I wanted to do is a quick little bit of show and tell. Um, Everyone likes gear, so let's start off with something along those lines. And this is a pedal I've had for a while. It is the Washburn Stack-in-a-Box. It's kind of an early
Very cool.
attempt from the mid '80s at doing the amp in a box that has become so common now. It was branded Washburn, but the same technology manufactured in Japan was sold under various manufacturers, including Martin and a few other companies. But it's basically designed to sound like a Marshall when you plug it into your amplifier. And The interesting thing, what interests me about this pedal is the question of what is special about this pedal? What makes this pedal? What's the magic in this pedal? And my answer is nothing. There is no magic in this pedal. This is one of many types of distortion pedals released from that time frame and to this day that promise to be the silver bullet, the holy grail, the thing that can get you your sound. But I think any of us who spent enough time in the hunt for the holy grail of pedals know that it doesn't exist. And so the purpose of it, what does make it magic, is how you choose the tools that speak to you and combine them in ways that create your authentic sound. And that is what makes the magic. So all those presets on the current digital tools that allow you to sound exactly like your favorite artists, they didn't get there by that method. They got there by using the tools that they had available, putting them together and developing a voice over time. And so what's special about this box to me is just that I like it and that it sounds good. And I combine it with the other tools in my chain, and it's not the holy grail, but it's a combination of elements that nobody else is using. I'm pretty confident that if I lined up my signal chain, nobody's using that particular combination of elements. And I know it's the same for you with
Yeah.
your, sort of eclectic group of pedals, both purchased and created, and your custom guitars and so forth. And so that's really the show and tell from that is just the magic is in how we combine the elements and what we do with it to make our own musical voice.
And it looks cool. And if you wanted to go down the rabbit hole, I bet that you could get all the different branded versions of that for hardly any money. And it would be kind of, like, oh, this is my boutique pedal collection of these odd, amp in a box things before an amp in the box was really technologically feasible. And I just like the cool little neon accents on it and stuff, which just
Yes.
screams that era. That is,
I admit that's what drew me in and probably colors my view of the sound of it too. I look at the Martin one that's like gray with red knobs or
yeah,
something, and
yeah.
that can't sound as good.
Oh,
It
those
can't
Martin
possibly.
pedals look like shit. And that's one of many reasons why Martin failed in the electric guitar realm. I mean, what they had no business marketing guitar pedals, so just ridiculous.
But underneath those ugly packages were solid Japanese engineering. So
Oh, sure,
yeah,
and all that stuff from Japan during that time period was good. I mean, you can't really find anything that was just complete garbage. Well, I'm sure you could, but maybe Rock Tech. But I don't think those were made in Japan. I think those were made like in Taiwan or maybe even early China.
yeah, I think it really covers the gamut. I think this one was was Japan, but a lot of them weren't. But another quick thing to show and tell was we talked last time about obscure good music and the band 2020, and I found the upside of feeding a lot of authenticity into the algorithm is if you do that enough, it spits some of that back at you. And after doing a deep dive on that band a couple weeks ago, now YouTube is showing me all kinds of obscure quality power pop and overlooked bands and so forth. And so it's a plug for pursuing that. Don't just stand back from it, but search for it, listen to it, give those videos the views, and you'll get back more of that authenticity. And I think the more we surface that, the better, just to keep it in the eye as we head into the age of AI.
Of course. No, that's super cool. Yeah, digging for stuff and then, just keeping your feed kind of, I like to feed my feed so that I don't just keep getting the same things over and over again as well, because that tends to become a crushing thing after a while, where you're just like, oh, I keep consuming the same content because I just go with the feed. You have to plug new things into it to keep it fresh. And did you want to talk about any of the recent content on the channel to spotlight anything before we dive into AI?
Yeah, I thought, there was a lot of good stuff since our last conversation, but the one that stood out to me was your video about making your instruments sound good unplugged and unamplified. And that's something that I haven't given a lot of conscious thought to, but I realize that it has been really important to me because I spent a lot of time playing unplugged. I spend a lot more time unplugged than I do plugged in, even on electric instruments. And I've always favored electric guitars and basses that sound good unamplified, where I can sit in a room and play and not have to be plugged in. And when you do that, you really notice all the flaws and the warts and the buzzes and so forth. And the more you compensate for that further down the chain, the more you kind of box yourself into a corner. So I really appreciated hearing, a spotlight on that. And how do you apply that in your own practice? Do you spend a lot of time not plugged in? What do you see as the impact once you do plug in?
I dial them all to sound perfect unplugged, because I spend probably 90% of my time unplugged on both bass, on everything, I play probably about 20% of the time on an acoustic guitar, about 5% of the time on an electric bass unplugged, the other, 65% on an electric guitar unplugged. I don't spend much time with the amps. I have been lately because I'm preparing to record, but if I'm practicing or composing or just want to pick it up and just mess around for a second, I'm never plugging anything in. And that kind of began my journey, about 5 or 6 years ago. I had a couple that sounded really good unplugged, and I just ended up playing just those guitars all the time. And then I went through the, last few years of just, really either getting rid of things or getting new things, or taking, a large chunk of my collection that I held on to through everything and just making them all as perfect as I possibly can unplugged. Because, that is the majority of my playing time, is on an unplugged electric guitar. I think a lot of people are in that boat because they have families, or they have, they live in an apartment, or whatever the situation. It's so much easier to just pick up an electric guitar and play it, to me, almost in an acoustic. Because then on an acoustic, sometimes I'm like self-conscious and I'm like, oh, I'm going to be too loud. But with an unplugged electric, it's just like the perfect vehicle for just being creative, in my opinion.
I think so. And to tie back to that theme of authenticity, I think while there's definitely an art form in itself to sort of playing the amp and playing the, riding the edge of overdrive and feedback and things like that with various instruments, not to disparage that, but I think there's connection to an authenticity that only exists in an unamplified state, where it's just you and the music. That you're not playing a preset, you're not playing the reverb, you're not playing, the delay. These things all have a part in the finished product. But the more time you spend connecting to just you and the notes, and what do you have to say, if that's your foundation, then that's a solid foundation. And I think it's easy to get lost in playing the tone or playing the pedal as
Hmm.
opposed to what do I really have to say musically at the end of the day. Because presets and digital simulations can be a rabbit hole. They can really pile up, and before you know it, you're just playing around with a sound that was created for you. And so, starting at the source with unamplified, the confronting the reality of what do I have to say here without any assistance? It's just me and something that won't make any sound unless I make all the sound. I think that's a way to stay grounded in your own authenticity.
Absolutely, and it's interesting because sometimes I do come up with a musical idea or a song structure or something, and it is while I'm playing plugged in or I'm using a specific effect. I have a song in my batch that was very much the product of delay. And what I found is that it was a very unsatisfying progression when I played it just on its own. And as I have evolved that song, I spent a lot more time developing the actual chordal structure and the harmonic content unplugged away from the delay, and then it changed my whole approach to how I was going to use the delay, and I came up with a much better idea. Now, the delay was the inspiration for the original kernel of the idea, but the idea, if I would have stayed with it, it would have been much more one-dimensional than what I ended up with by, working it away from the effect. So I just find that that's useful.
Yeah, that's a great example of retaining the human element in the technology. The technology can inspire. There's no question about that. But when you look back on it, was it just the technology and it didn't go any further than that, or did you do what you did, which is to examine it, to break it down, to really get to know it and really understand what it was, and put your own unique stamp on it? I think that going back to what we talked about in the last video with Steve Albini, it's like you may not be able to. Everyone can't replicate the same sonic environment that they inhabit, but we can look for the opportunities we do have to be authentic and to connect to it and not lose our humanity or go into autopilot on it. Because once we go a little too far down that path, we start to blur the lines, I think, about whether we are the artist, whether we are making art, or whether we're just sort of a spectator
Yeah.
for the technology really carrying the weight for us.
Which brings us to, whether or not an artist is even involved, which is kind of what I wanted to
Yes.
start off with the AI thing. I scribbled down a couple of things as my little bullet points, and they may very well intersect with yours. But I was just going to start it off with, you've been discussing authenticity quite a bit, and I think that we can move past that in a certain extent fairly quickly here, because it's I think that people are going to ultimately, the more and more stuff that is generative or is derivative of AI technology, or even just popular music in general, I think authenticity is something people are going to always crave. Maybe not everybody. Maybe it will become more niche. Who knows? But I think authenticity is really important. It's really important to me. And I know that the question of, how can AI be authentic? Well, there would be some who would argue there may be, methodologies involved, or using them to, be chaos generators, or using them as some sort of tool. I get that. But I think that the real question is going to come down to the fact that, will people still crave authenticity after they've been bombarded with a bunch of AI generative stuff? And what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a big question, and I think that I don't see that being talked about quite as much, in the sense that a lot of the conversation seems to be about, can AI ever do this X as well as a human can? And
Mm.
the answer in some cases is yes, some cases no. But the point, I think, is less about its specific abilities than about how it can change the overall value system. I've seen online discussions where programmers are kind of scoffing at AI and saying, oh, it's not doing any real programming. It's not doing the really heavy lifting that it takes a human to do. And my thought on that is, well, it doesn't have to. It just has to do what it does well enough that it draws everyone else's attention to that,
Hmm.
and that becomes the new value system, where the bosses decide, oh, okay, we'll do that, that looks good, it's easy, it's cheap, we'll just make that our priority, and we won't even do the other thing anymore. And I think that to me, that's the threat from a creative standpoint, is that um, and it goes back to the feeling I have that technology is more in the driver's seat of music than maybe it ever has been before. I think that um, technology's always played a part in music, but it was traditionally more of a supportive role. It's how to make the sound, how to capture the sound, how to present the sound. But music was what was being centrally pursued in the process. But with the state we're in now, it's almost like music is a feature of the technology, between
Part of the product set.
phones. Yeah, between phones and computers and streaming, it's like it's a marketing boost for a product rather than the central focus. And so, to me, that creates a vulnerability for the value system to be changed. If technology is really driving people's priorities more than the music, then getting back to what you're saying is, can the technology create some environment where just the overall value system of what people think is relevant in the world changes enough that it demolishes the opportunity for authentic artists to take part? So that's I see that as, if we're looking at kind of the threat or the risk, I definitely see that as a big part of it.
But an interesting thought that always occurs to me when I discuss this issue, and I hear you discussing it, to a certain extent, that has already happened. It happened with streaming services. It's happened with people consuming music not as it used to be a destination thing. You had an interest in something or someone or a genre, and then you would go and you would buy a physical product, and then you would live with that physical product, and you would find ways to take it with you, like dubbing an LP to a cassette or whatever it is, and taking it with you in the car. And what I've seen over the past 20 years is that music has shifted largely, almost completely away from that, and for especially for the younger people, but even people our age and older. It's so funny. It's like, as soon as those streaming services and being able to create a station and all these sorts of things have come up, music has become devalued to the point where it's expected almost to be free, or just be that $25 a month subscription. So to a large extent, it's already happened. And I think that what AI does is it pushes that even further over the cliff by suddenly, well, those who own streaming services or record labels or control the content that is being, given to people through subscription services, if they can create that for pennies on the dollar generatively, then you don't have to pay royalties, and you don't have to pay the artists at all, and you don't have to worry about, humans at all at that point, and you can just generate product. And I think that is the tipping point area that is not as far off as people think. I think that a lot of times I hear, well, this is still a long ways out. I think it's kind of like, discussing climate change. It's more exponential every year. It's like, oh, this is going much quicker than we thought. And I think that it's going to be the same with AI generative art. I think it's going to be
really
much faster.
I think you're right about that. Even the people at the heart of it express surprise at how quickly it's coming along. And I think you're right about that. And I think that it even holds the potential, in my mind, to change what we consider the unit of musical experience. Now we think, even with technology changing so much, we think in terms of songs and albums and artists and so forth. But with generative content, maybe I can pull up the app and say, I want a continuous, unending stream of Marvin Gaye singing the Slayer catalog. And it'll just be a continuous stream. It won't be a song. It won't be 5-minute experience and then something else. It'll just be, I can just generate infinite continuous content of a certain kind or evolve it. I can, it could change our entire concept of what a unit of musical consumption is. But to kind of tie back to what you were saying about what it kind of sweeps away or what it makes redundant. One thing that I think there's a lot to be cynical about and a lot to be, worried about, I think, with AI. But one aspect that is potential optimism for me is that you talk about the last 20 years or so, the technology has changed, but also the way music is made has been changed. And really what's prevalent now seems to be music based on samples, music based on preset loops, prefab loops, just cobbling preset pieces together that someone else has made, auto-tuning everything completely. And when you add all of that up and set it side by side with what AI can do, I see the way a lot of music is made now is effectively just inefficient AI. It's just taking existing parts and pieces and cobbling it together. We don't need people to do that anymore. We don't need human beings to make music that way. AI can do it better and faster and cheaper and with more variations and at larger scale than humans can. And so my hope is...
So you're saying that the only place left for humans will be to make authentic music?
Effectively, is it because I see when I think about what becomes most redundant with the advent of AI, it's this sort of synthetic fake type of semi-human music that doesn't even really need human involvement anymore. And so I could see the tidal wave of AI novelty for a time just overcoming everything and distracting from everything historical and traditions and authentic art. But I think what it actually makes redundant is all the negative trends, to my perception, in music creation over the last 20, 25 years, which is sort of dehumanized human music. And so we'll have the AI novelty. The only thing that isn't redundant with that is authenticity. So it doesn't mean authentic music will rise to the level of prominence or commercial success that it has had before, but it seems like it has less threat to be completely made redundant than all the stuff that we've been seeing the last 20 years. So maybe somewhere in there is some hope.
I can see that, and I think that people do gravitate towards it. I see it with my daughter. She likes Billie Eilish a lot, and she likes Billie Eilish for who she is as a person. And I think that the human aspect of music will always persevere in some way or shape or form. I just think that really AI's main lane is going to be in passive consumption. I think that it's going to be, and what that'll hurt catalog artists, and that'll hurt the chances for indie artists like ourselves who are hoping to get those extra streams, just might not get them. But that just makes us have to work twice as hard to work on other platforms to show our humanity and to show that, hey, there are people making music is cool, and keep that alive. And there's another point that I wanted to bring up that I don't hear very many people talking about at all when it comes to AI, and that's the Uncanny Valley. I think that there's going to be, and for those who don't know what that is, the Uncanny Valley is like when you see a robot that's made to look completely human, and it is as authentic as it can get, you can still detect that it's not real. We're still animals, and we still have instincts, and we can still discern between real and machine. So when you enter the Uncanny Valley idea, I think a lot of people are going to have an instinctual turning away, at some point. And I think that's a huge issue, and that's an issue that I don't think can be overcome. Like, it can happen when you're watching a movie with great CGI and you kind of get drawn into it, and then after a while you turn your brain off and you're just like, okay, I'm in the Star Wars universe, or I'm in this universe. I think it's going to be much harder to do with visuals of a band playing that's not a band, that's purely generative. And I think it's going to also be more difficult to pull off with music than they think too. I think they may be able to do it where it's tuned properly, the phrasing is right, and the lyrics are right, and everything sounds right. But it's still going to be like, I think that we'll still be able to kind of cock our heads, and go, that just doesn't feel right. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that's that's huge, and I think it's interesting because maybe it's underestimating the capabilities of technology. Maybe our human sensory apparatus is not as all-encompassing as we like to think it is, and it'll be fooled more readily than we think. And certainly with still images, I think we've gotten to that point where you see I can't remember the name of the website, but it's the site that automatically generates completely AI portraits of people, photos of people's faces. And people have already the technology is now to the point where people can't tell the difference. And in fact, people tend to pick more of the real photos as fake than the fake photos as fake. And so that's a worrisome thing. I've looked at that and it fools me. And I normally have very good instincts for that. But I think what you're saying, when you go beyond just a two-dimensional still image, you get exponentially more complicated, and there's so many variables at play. Then, CGI artists have been working for decades on advancing the technique, and they still can't make a realistic person walking. You can always tell there's that lack of weight, lack of gravity, no matter how realistic it is. And so between physical movement and sound and the nuances of the human voice, will it be the norm long enough that our instincts are actually modified? It's hard to tell, but it does seem like a huge gulf. And just as, maybe going all the way back to the first use of auto tune in that Cher song, it's the novelty of it sort of just become accepted to where the Uncanny Valley becomes a style in itself. Who knows? But
and that I think is something that is entirely predictable, and we should expect that. I think that there will be, and there's a precedent for that too. And this may be not the best example, but it's one that popped into my head immediately when I started thinking about this. Was Gorillaz? Okay, so this is a project. I don't want to be the front man, Damon Albarn or whatever, is like, I don't want to be the face of this project. So we will create cartoon characters. And then that way we'll have the animation and we'll do the show behind a curtain or whatever. And then with the holographic stuff that's happening now too, with a lot of these legacy artists that are, and other bizarre things, like, I don't know if you heard about the Steve Marriott thing, but his family is fighting to not have his music, this AI generative, Small Faces style music and Humble Pie stuff released, so there's legal issues already popping up from all of this. But I digress. Back to the Gorillaz thing. So there is a precedent for kind of like stepping back and kind of putting out something that's intentionally artificial. And I think that, and dovetailing that in with what you just said, I think that there's room for a complete genre of generative music. That's fine. Whatever. There's an infinite number of genres out there. Everything is niche now, and none of us as indie artists or, whatever, I'm not expecting to, I just want to find my audience. I'm not looking to steal somebody else's. So it's like, I think there's plenty of room for that. I think that my biggest, like I said, just to kind of head towards a wrap up here, I think my biggest concern about AI is that it's going to devalue music both monetarily and in the consumption realm when it comes to streaming and when it comes to passive consumption of music. I think artists will remain. I think that a lot of people will still remain interested in that. But there's a large percentage of the music listening audience on the planet that is just purely wants something in the background, and seeing a lot of that potential revenue, passive revenue of just, constant streaming of music go away because it's done by computers instead of by people who are getting a royalty check. I think that's the real hidden threat. And that's kind of all I have to say at the moment about this. We're going to be discussing this again, but I'd like to hear
Yeah,
your thoughts.
it's not going away. And yeah, what you said is really what it boils down to. And I don't think, we're far past the point of the idea of stopping this kind of thing from existing, but what can we do? What options do we have? What is it important for people to do? It's kind of the same as it's always been. Maybe just more urgent is vote with your money and with your influence and with your choices. And just like in a regular election, one vote doesn't change everything, but the cumulative effect of it can direct where things go and inhibit the worst aspects of things. And so we need to vote with our money. We need to keep buying and supporting music that we like, whether it's physical media or something else. It doesn't mean we have to carry the whole load ourselves, but if you have an opportunity, if an artist really captures your imagination, do something to support it. Even just choosing what we listen to in the streaming services is casting a vote. It's directing the attention and the perception of value for those tracking it to the more authentic things, and then whatever influence we have through the social world, which I think is one of the few remaining areas of direct influence where major corporate decisions are still being influenced by the reactions being received on social media and the public. It's like I see on, art-related Facebook pages, masses of people arguing against AI. Don't bring AI here. This isn't art. This isn't, this isn't human. And so I think, we reinforce what we reinforce. And so choose authentic and reject the inauthentic everywhere you go to the extent that you can. And the cumulative effect of that will be to help protect what we want to protect. We can't stem the existence of this type of technology, but we can influence it and we can preserve the part that it still doesn't have control over. So I feel like that direct action is how the things we value were created in the first place, and it's how we can help preserve them going into this strange new world.
And it is a strange new world indeed. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for joining me again, and I look forward to our next conversation. If you have watched this video up to this point, I would appreciate a like and a subscribe, shares and comments. Love the comments section, and the subscriptions are very critical for us to move forward and get into more interesting content where we can interact and be authentic together and beat this AI thing. I swear we can do it. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching. Thank you to Kevin for joining me again, and we'll see you next time with more content. You take care.